Well, welcome everyone to episode 2 of the Real Profit, Real Perspective podcast. So, you're a solo entrepreneur. I'm Connor Malatesta, managing partner at Markoff and Malatesta CPAs, and I'm joined by my co host, Ryan Bannister, who is the illustrious owner of One Up Advisors. Ryan, how you doing today?
I am peachy. How are you?
Oh, I'm always glad when we survive the week to make it to another recording
I
session.
know. Yeah, and today we're living in my world.
And what world could that be, Mr.
The
Bannister?
solopreneur world. And one you
So,
are familiar with, but you have progressed. You have ascended.
it's funny how many of those struggles start to be replaced by other struggles, and it just kind of falls into memory, into myth, uh, as they say.
I'm glad I can
So
remind you today.
Yay, all those memories that I have suppressed deep down and don't bring out in any context. So, we wanted to talk today about being a solo entrepreneur or a solopreneur or a new business owner or pretty much somebody who has just gotten started and it is just you and you probably don't know really what the hell you are doing. You are just trying to figure things out from week to week. And we figured what better place to start talking about business and all of that whole journey than at the beginning when you start with nothing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you are currently right in the midst of all that, aren't you?
Currently, right in the middle of it all. And what a journey it is, man. Yeah,
So
it's
tell us about it. What's going on?
Yeah, so where I am at now, I call the firm like one and a half people, right? Like it's me and a contractor that I use to help me with some bookkeeping work. So no full-time employees yet, no part-timers, just outsourcing right now. And I've been at it for actually next month is the 3-year anniversary of my firm. So
Oh, congratulations.
thanks, man. Yeah, it's exciting.
I still can't believe you've been grinding away at this for 3 years.
It flies by, dude. I mean, I look back and think, I mean, the first 6 months of it really hit on what you were saying of you're still trying to figure it all out. Like you have this idea and the need for it, like there is demand. So you go start this thing, whether it's a, I don't know, product, a service, or whatever your idea is, you go and start. And as soon as you hit the as soon as you hit the ground, I think all your plans go out the window, and then for the next 3 years, you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. And
So did you
here I
have
am.
a business plan when you were getting started, or how did you actually get things kind of from the ground, from just ideas floating in the ether to you actually doing stuff? How did all that end up working out for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thinking back on it now, because I did have a business plan, and that covered all the areas as far as like marketing, especially like getting the name out there. Which the first 6 months that plan was out the window because traction
So
was so
what
slow that
was your plan in the beginning? What was your kind of initial, because I know at this point we're both really familiar with the fact that you can do all the planning you want, and then the moment you go to put it
yep.
into play, I'm reminded of. I'm pretty certain that this is one of those sayings that would pop up in the Call of Duty screens after you would die, where they would have the cool little sayings from history, but it was the "No plan survives first contact with the enemy."
Exactly.
So how how did you get started with that? What was the initial plan, your kind of starting assumptions, and then what did you immediately find out was completely not going to work?
Yeah, that is 100% what happened, man. Like, you start, and as soon as you make contact with the enemy, the plan goes out the window. Like, so I started with my niche for this business is specializing in content creators, small business owners, and kind of other solopreneurs. So in the content creator space, my initial thought was, hey, let's put content out there. Let's do like Instagram, YouTube, and start posting because that's where they are, right? Like that's where their business is. But I found like really quickly that that didn't work as well as I thought it was going to. And it probably took longer, I don't know, longer than it should have. You know, I hate the should word, but you know, cuz everything takes what time it's going to take, right? So, eventually I figured out like we need to pivot a little bit, and now I've come back to a point where I layer those marketing and business development activities in different like tiers. So, content creation I put in like the lowest tier because you're not actually directly speaking with somebody or making contact. So, one-on-one conversations, networking events, and things where you're face to face with people, I call those high touch activities. And over especially this past year and ever since that first 6 month period passed, that's what I've been putting more focus into, like high touch and mid touch things, which are, I kind of say like one to many, like webinar activities, right? So, not to go too in depth on like the marketing stuff, but that's where my head was at. And it took conversations with, you know, people like you, other colleagues, and people who have been there, done that to say, like, what are you doing about this? And I'm like, oh man, I didn't think about that yet. So I think that's one of the traps that solo entrepreneurs can fall into is you get really deep in the weeds of every aspect of the business because you wear all the hats. So it gets really hard to pull yourself out and look at the business from a high level. So I think the biggest lesson I've learned from that is taking advice from all the sources that you can get it from people who are smarter than you, who have done it before, who are, you know, I don't know, all of the categories of things. So,
Well, I was
um,
thrown in that list, and you just said smarter than you, so I'm going to take the compliment here. So, if you could go back and kind of redo those beginning days, what would you have done differently? Because I do have some follow ups here of things that are kind of coming to mind, but it's always interesting to hear because that first 6 months to a year is a shit show.
yeah,
It's always a shit show. So if you snap our fingers, go back 3 years to when you're getting started again, what over 3 years of experience now being a solo entrepreneur, getting traction running and having enough where you can have not just you working on things, but some additional support. What are some of the biggest mistakes you made getting started that now looking back you go, that was a rookie mistake. I can't believe I thought that was a good idea.
yeah. I, the biggest one that comes to mind is something I know you and we've talked about before, and I think it comes into around processes and delivering the the actual service or the product. And I think that takes time to figure out. But when I went into this, I think I wish I could have put more time into the actual like delivery of the service and the product instead of figuring it out on the fly. And I don't, I'd take it with a grain of salt because it changes. And I mean, even if I look back to where I was 3 years ago, I don't know if that advice would have even sunk in or been effective. Like you almost have to learn those lessons before it even matters. But I think the other branch of it on business development would have been more face-to-face conversations and even more of putting myself out there, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm explaining that well enough. But um, I think another one too is getting off of like trading time for money as much as you can, like the 1-to-1 ratio of like if I'm putting in this many hours, this is how much I'm making. And that kind of, I think, starts to transition you from a solo to a small business in a little bit of ways, if you're hiring employees. But I think outsourcing more areas quicker than I did would have benefited me more as well.
Kind of that common thing we even see with our own clients of the sooner you get other people pulled in to help you, the faster you can get other things developing
Right.
is I think what you're kind of saying there.
Yeah, exactly. And I thinking about it in the terms of my clients, like with content creators, they are actively filming, writing, and editing videos, audio, whatever the medium is. So what is the thing that only they can do? Well, it's
Mhm.
their face on camera, or it's their voice, or one of those things that their audience is following. So they need to do that 100% of the time, which means cutting out editing or things that aren't directly generating the revenue like that. So what do you do for that? Well, you go out and hire editors and contractors to produce that content for you. And it all just goes back to the old adage, spend money to make money. And as long as you can look back at that ratio and say, okay, I spent $1,000, but this video made 4,000, theoretically, you should then compound all your resources into doing more of that because you're making 4x off what you're paying this person to help you do it.
Now, what about in the circumstances where, oh, what's the phrase that Silicon Valley loves to throw around? It starts with a B. Um, think in Silicon Valley, it's not bastards, which is what most of them are. Sorry, private equity. Watch with our luck, a private equity group will listen to this and be like, well, we were going to go to them for service. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. Bootstrapping. So in your example here about, basically spending money to make money, right? What about when you're in that beginning phase and you don't have shit for resources? Which when I got started, that is really where I was at, particularly in my first year of going out and being a solo entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I mean, my first year, I pulled in what was it, $24,000 in gross revenue for an
Mm-hmm.
entire 12-month period, which was just enough to continue to keep paying bills. And so it was very much a I would love to spend money on marketing and advertising and stuff like that, or different contractors and things, but I don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to a certain extent, looking back, because that was 5 years ago for me, there were definitely other opportunities where there's a lot of things, Jesus, that I could probably talk for an hour on all the stuff I would have done differently getting started now
Oh yeah.
after, being in business for 5 years. But it's how do you make the best usage of your limited resources? Because I do think if you're a new business owner and you've never run a business before and you just have a thing that you know how to do and you are going to try and now turn that into its own thing, I am generally one to advise caution before going out and committing a ton of resources to something
Mm-hmm.
like that. I would not want somebody to hear this advice and say, I need to take all my money and go pour it into Google Ads or for this editor and or whatever it is, and I'm going to get this one piece of equipment and that's going to take all my capital and there we go, and it's basically a do or die moment. I mean, there's plenty of stories that you hear of people that do that leverage their house, their cash, whatever, into at one asset, and then that's what they end up succeeding with.
Mm-hmm.
You also do not hear about the dozens more that do that and then ended up having to sell it and go back to their W-2 job because the ship sank. So kind of with that idea in mind, if somebody is getting started and they don't have the resources to play with, which I do think describe both of us kind of when we got started. What would be some of the in your mind the most important thing to prioritize as a new business owner trying to figure this stuff out? If you had
Mhm.
30 seconds to try and distill everything you've gone through and are still going through into one kind of piece of advice, I'm curious because I don't know if we've actually talked about this before, but what would your one key piece of advice be?
Ooh. I, the first thing that comes to mind is I think defining what either like success looks like for you and what your end goal is with this whole thing. Because I'm with you, man. I was gonna say like I was at that same point. I had nothing like resources starting out. You know, I had my savings and my wife's income, which paid our bills, thank God. And the first year, it was like 17K, I think, the first year. So, you know, you're just like grinding out every little cent of income that you can get. So I think it really depends at first on what business you're running. Like if you're a service business, I think either one of us or, you know, you see bookkeeping firms all the time and accountants that are one man shops that are literally just providing a service they know how to do, they do it well, and they crank out like 200, 200 clients a month or something, you know, something
Mm-hmm.
big for one person. I don't know. But um, if you're looking to grow or if you want to stay at your own personal capacity, I think is a big decision you need to make up front. Because if you want to grow past a one man shop, you should put that infrastructure in place as early as you can. Like writing down processes like we talked about and refining those as much as you can. So when you do have the resources, you can bring a contractor in to outsource and they can immediately hit the ground running with some training time, of course, but you're not running from behind when you get to capacity and say, oh crap, I need help on this. I don't even know I can't even tell you what I do every month. I just do it. So,
Which is just the best advice to give to somebody who's supposed to recreate your work, which is, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't know, figure it out. And then they sit there and go, what am I doing? And then you're going, why are they not getting stuff done? And it turns into a nightmare.
yeah.
Ask me how I know.
Yep.
Been there, done that. I think I'm gonna jump in real quick because I know this is a discussion we've had a lot, and one thing that I've had the benefit of being more disconnected from that solo entrepreneur ordeal with where the firm is at is it has given me a good time to kind of digest everything I went through and what our other clients have gone through and the advice I was given. And you know, I've given out this advice to other clients, and if you're a new business owner and you've never had a business before, you've got basically three things that you're prioritizing. These are three very simple things. First, get the work, whatever it is. If you do not have sales or anything to do, you're not a business, and everything else you do does not matter. As you found out, where you had all those plans for advertising and marketing and content creation, and then you did not have any clients or work coming in from it, and then you quickly realized, well, that was a waste of fucking time.
Yep.
Uh,
And it goes
get
back to rule number one from our previous episode of you gotta make money.
it's it's funny how those fundamentals kind of stay at play through the whole thing. But your priority one is get the work. Priority two is get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Figure usually at that point you're super excited. You've got your first client, you've got your first project, you've got your first job, you have your first order. Figure out how you're gonna get paid before you start committing any resources to anything. You know, pick an invoicing system, what cash, figure out what you're going to do, and then make sure you get paid, then figure out how to do the work. It really is one of those funny ones, and I've had this discussion even with more established businesses looking to grow. It is amazing how many problems do not become a problem when you have a pot of money that comes in. If you suddenly land a $500,000 contract and you get paid even half of that up front, well, you're a little less worried about having to spend money to make it happen because that came in and now you've got payment. You'll figure it out.
Right.
You've got that much coming in. You'll figure something out, which I was reminded of as you mentioned the developing process earlier on. And this is something I'd love to talk about in a future episode as we have expanded our services from kind of core accounting into more of an advisory role. There's a lot of services I have not done before. And it struck a chord with me as you mentioned coming a not having process earlier, that I still have some services that we've only done once or twice that I don't have process for because I don't know how it's going to work into the future. And I think that was a lot of when you got started doing a lot of this. I mean, we worked as financial auditors. We knew how to audit. You knew how to do a lot of the internal accounting stuff. And so moving into this kind of personal finance space at the beginning, you sit there and go, I have no fucking clue how this is really gonna work. You get the work, then you get paid, and then you figure out how to do the work. And
Yep.
that cycle, ironically enough, repeats itself over and over, even as you grow and expand. That you'll hit new kinds of work. You're not totally certain how to do it. You get paid because you need money, and collections is always a touchy subject. And then you figure out as you're in there, you know, if you're competent in what you do, you'll be able to figure out how it's going to work and make it better and better. Yes, hello Al. If you're listening to the audio only, my cat is here. If you see the video, well, lucky you get to see a cat. But that's what I was really kind of resonating as you were sharing that, is it's that same cycle of get the work is the most important thing. My grandfather is very fond of saying that if a business does not have sales, it is not a business. Um, he's had his own businesses, he's had successful businesses, and he's had businesses that failed, and they failed because he didn't have sales. That is your when you're getting started. I think my biggest advice to a lot of new businesses, pretty much all of them, is worry more about getting the work than internal processes or anything else you're
Yeah.
going to do, because when you have nothing, your time is also worthless. So that first project you get, if you break it down by hourly rate, if whatever it ends up looking like, it's never going to look good. If you're a new business, even if you've got, unless you've got 30 years of experience in what you've been doing in pre-existing relationships and you already pretty much know how this is going to work ahead of time, some of this advice is probably not even going to be relevant to you because you're effectively, it may be your first business, but you already know how the business needs to run. A lot of this is geared towards, like a lot of our clients, it's their first business and they just end up with a business or are not sure how it's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
But make sure you get the work. That, like, sales is the most important thing for a business.
Yep.
That is it. It boils down to sales is the most important thing, which you learned when you did a bunch of content creation, advertising, and sat there and went, well, shit, where's the
100%,
money?
man. And I, that honestly is probably, now that you bring it up, the 100% the best thing I've spent money on. The resources I have that I've used, the best thing I've spent it on was sales training and education. Because, like you said before, man, I mean, we were financial auditors. I had literal zero sales experience.
Mm-hmm.
And even going into my own firm, as a accountant and financial planner, that's great, but now you got to sell business. Like you are by default in sales now.
Yeah,
And I,
we have people I know we talk to all the time. Well, I'm just not good at sales. It's like you're
yeah,
the owner of the business. You are the you a lot of them, particularly when you're getting started. It's like I'm sorry, you do not have the luxury of being bad at sales. You
right.
have nothing right now. You are starting with that. If you don't believe in yourself enough to get paid, why in the fuck do you think anybody else is going to actually
Yep.
want to pay you to do things if you can't go out there and sell yourself? Would it inspire confidence if you reached out to your accountant and said, "Hey, can you do this?" Well, I don't
I don't
know.
know.
I'm just not sure if we really if we can, I mean I can try. You'd be sitting there after 15 minutes going, "What the hell is this guy talking about?"
Yeah. Well, and I say like, dude, even if the first off marketing and content attempts had worked, people coming in with intro calls and like meeting a prospect for the first time, I mean, some of them maybe just by sheer chance are going to convert to clients, but if you can't help somebody understand how what you do is going to help them, then you aren't going to get the work to begin with. And I think the like process formation and even the like content creation or marketing work can be places to hide from that. Like if you think that you're bad at sales or you're like nervous about that, putting yourself out there to go get the work, you could sit there all day and say, "Oh man, I'm putting out these videos on YouTube and it's just not working. Like, this sucks." Or
Mhm.
like, "Man, I've been really perfecting my monthly bookkeeping process for clients," but you're not if you don't have the work. You're
I'm
not
I'm
doing it on
so
real.
ready to get this going just as soon as I get my first job. You don't have a business, you have something that gives you an excuse to not focus on other
Yeah.
things. And I think for me one of the hardest learning lessons I knew from family members who'd given advice. My parents have had businesses. I've got business owners in my family. But one of the hardest things to really realize is that when you when you're a solo entrepreneur, when it's just you, the beauty of that is that all of your success is yours. You get to take credit for every successful job, every time you get paid. All of that feels really good to say we did these projects, we picked up these clients, we did these things. You get to claim credit for all of that. Also, every single failure is also on you, which is the hardest thing for a lot of new entrepreneurs to really wrap their heads around, is that you don't have anyone to shift the blame when something doesn't work well. When you're a large company, your sales team isn't performing or accounting isn't performing. Yes, it's their fault without getting into proper leadership and blah blah blah. And you shouldn't be viewing it that anyway, but for the purposes of this example, it's their fault that this is happening.
Yep.
But when it's you, it is just you have to get comfortable standing up for yourself. You have to get comfortable selling yourself. You have to get comfortable telling people, "Fuck you, pay me." Because otherwise you will get run over. Nobody is going to save you, really,
Hmm.
is the biggest thing. And that gets a lot of people where they think, well, I'm just not, good at these things, or I'm bad at asking for money or to get paid and stuff like that. It's like this is not as if you're in an established organization and there are safety nets. This is truly fundamental. The game of capitalism in its purest form is you are in direct competition against other people. If they get the work, you don't.
Hmm.
Then you don't eat. You don't get paid. Your family is not taken care of. And if you're going to do this, which it is entrepreneurship has probably been both the hardest thing I have ever done, which is saying something because we've both passed the CPA exam. Um, it's both the hardest thing I've ever done, but also truly the most satisfying up to the time of this recording. I'm sure in the future
Oh
there'll
yeah.
be more satisfying things, but a lot of people don't realize that you don't get to lie to yourself or lie to the market about I'm not good at these things and still reap the rewards from that. Every one of your character flaws is going to make itself known.
Hmm.
If you're not good at sales or you're not personable, when you're not getting clients or you're not getting projects or you're not moving product because these things you're bad at, that is your fault. It's going to make itself known, and that is something that I have seen people unable to truly handle, is realizing that when they screw up or all of these things, you have to do it. You don't have anything else.
Yeah.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir telling you that, but hoping that this puts into context for anyone that's listening to this. Yeah, it's hard. You've got to get good at sales. You've got to get good at standing up for yourself. You've got to get good
Hmm.
at being able to adjust to new information on the fly. You've got to get good at figuring out how are you going to brand yourself. How are you going to communicate? What hours are you going to work? How much you know how much money are you going to put into it, or how are you going to get paid? What are you going to hold your clients to? If somebody, you're relying on a vendor and they don't pull through, how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to roll over if somebody is taking advantage, or are you going to stand up for yourself? Like, you truly, and I know this is said a lot of times for employees, just in job holders in general, is you have to be your biggest advocate. That is triply, quadruply, 10 times true when you're a solo business owner, because you aren't working for an organization that in some shape or form has a vested interest in making sure you succeed. You're competing with other people that may have more resources, more experience, better branding, more time in the market, other connections you don't have, and there is no safety net. You have to get good at these things. If you don't, you're gonna fail, and failure in a lot of this is not making a mistake. Failure is, I had to close up shop, I had to stop what I was doing, I had to go get a job to pay the bills. And I don't failure is not necessarily bad. If that happens, it's a learning thing. I don't want anyone listening to say that happen to feel as if they're being shamed for that, because I don't hold that really against anyone. Sometimes you're just dealt a losing hand from the beginning. If you started making horse-drawn carriages at the turn of the 1900s, and then suddenly automobiles did away with all that, that sucks.
That's just
That
bad timing.
Yep. Sometimes you're gonna lose because of factors that are completely outside of your control.
Yeah.
But oftentimes there's a lot we can do. But that's the biggest thing I've seen with a lot of entrepreneurs. And I know we've talked about this and we've
Hmm.
both gone through it. You're going through it, I'm going through it, is that it's that understanding of what you have to become good at if you want to not even grow, but just to hit an existence point. Pulling in, a business pulling in $1,500 a month basically is not really a business. You're barely making ends meet at that point. I mean,
Hmm.
it's nobody making just same thing that I had was pulling in around 2 grand a month that all was going out because of bills. That's a hobby at that point. You're just floating, you're not really on your feet. But being able to truly get on your feet means that you've got to find the work, get paid, do the work, rinse and repeat, get a little bit better at each one.
Yep.
um
Yeah.
for
I
I'll,
think
I'll let you go here. I've been rambling a
no,
little
you're
bit.
good. Like just have brought up a good point too, and um, kind of I think a good segue, honestly, to what we're going to talk about in the next episode. If you aren't good at sales or you aren't good at one aspect of the business, like you said, one outcome of that is eventual failure. But the other could be, okay, I recognize that this is not my strong suit. And for whatever reason, maybe I will never be good at this. Like, you have to recognize that and then be willing to say, okay, let's put the right person in this seat to help me. So I think that's one of the decisions you have to make, and say to yourself, like, whether staying as a solo business is important to you, or do you want to hire one, two, or I don't know, workforce of like 10 people to to get to that point. Like, and going back to my client base, a lot of huge creators are not the president of their company. They bring on somebody to run the actual business part while they still focus on the part that only they can do.
Hmm.
So I think that's a big part of it too, is being able to realize that, and that obviously is balanced with the resources you have to bring somebody on. Like, you have to get to that point. But if you're solo and you're, I don't know, doing a good business of, I don't know, say you're making 100 or 200K a year, like by yourself, and you get
Or
tired of
honestly,
like
even
wearing all
once you
the
start
hats,
hitting
like,
50 or 60K,
yeah,
like it
yeah,
really, once you got a little bit more. No, that's a good kind of counterpoint. Because I think a lot of times when I look at it, I still view it through that lens of truly starting with nothing. And so there's a lot of having to become, um, oh, the word is escape, is not so self-sufficient in a lot of those aspects. And because I think the other part that's important, even if your sales is the biggest one that we hear, is people saying they're not good at sales,
mm-hmm.
is that you don't have to be great, you just have to be good enough. But by doing it yourself, you also learn how that is supposed to work, what
Right.
works and what doesn't. And so that way, if you do have someone helping you with it, you aren't just at their mercy of them saying, well, here's the things we have to do, and you're sitting there going, I don't know what he's talking about, so I can't make a determine one way or another whether this is a good idea or not.
Yeah.
Instead, as you go through it yourself and learning, I think the biggest thing we should pretty much just repeat every episode is that no matter where you're at, learning, it truly is paramount in
Mm-hmm.
every aspect. Learning that, solo entrepreneurs got different lessons to learn, which a lot of it ends up being focused on your own personal development. And what, as you go through it, you'll also learn, where are you bad. By doing it, you'll sit there and go, wow, I should never do that again. Case in point, with our firm, I am a terrible tax preparer. I have prepared 6 tax returns over the course of my career, not including my own returns when I just had a W-2 job and plugged my shit into TurboTax and free
Yes,
filed
sir.
because that's all that was needed. I am not a good tax accountant. I hate the tax code. I don't pretend to know all of the ins and outs and the gray area. I I picked up doing tax returns just because I had some clients that I did accounting work for when I was getting started, and they said, "Look, can you just take care of filing the return?" To which I responded with full transparency about the only thing I'm going to be able to do is take those numbers, plug them into a return, and tell you what the system says. That is all you're going to get. There is no higher level of service here. If you find out about something else, you're not allowed to come crying to me that, well, why didn't we do this? Because I told you right now, I'm not a tax expert. I'm barely a preparer. Um, and that's why I have a tax partner who knows all that stuff and who told me when reviewing my returns, nope, you're never allowed to touch a tax return again. To which I said, that's totally fine.
That's a
I don't
welcome
want to.
change.
I only did the other ones because I needed the fucking money.
Yep.
And when somebody says, hey, can I pay you more to take care of this thing? Going back to our 3-step process, get the work, get paid, then figure out how to do the work. And
Mm-hmm.
now those engagements are so far enough in the past, I can actually disclose that without them getting upset. Although I did not sugarcoat that with them at all. But it really becomes that simple for a lot of it. Get the work, get paid, do the work, rinse and repeat. And as you do that stuff, when you go through the sales process or the marketing or the design or the pricing or the whatever it is, when you have to touch all those aspects, the organization, the communication, you're going to learn what you're bad at.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to be passable, but it will help you as we move into the content for episode 3 when you become a real business of where you need the most help. And I think that is a great stopping point.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add to this one. I think we fully covered.
That is it. It's about 40 minutes. That's all it takes to go over the entire essence of being a solo entrepreneur. There is nothing we could ever say on this topic ever again until we decide to revisit it in another few episodes of, oh, by the way, here's this other thing we wanted to talk
So
about.
once all the
It's
listeners let us
topical.
know what we forgot, you know.
Once we start getting comments saying, well, what about this thing? This doesn't make sense. I have this going on. Or, hey, what about this thing? And then we'll go, yeah, all right, we probably should schedule another 15 episodes just
Yeah, because we
on
did
this topic.
gloss over, we mentioned it a little bit, but you know, starting with no resources, there is the alternative of getting investors from the start, and we didn't even touch that.
I mean, to be honest,
Because I guess
that could be
a solo at that point, but
I mean, if you're coming in trying to be a solo entrepreneur and you've got the backing of investors, um, you're not playing by the same kind of rules as any. I mean,
that's very true.
you're still held by the same fundamentals, but you're not playing with the same rules,
Mm-hmm.
and it just ends up being very, very different. It's both different, but it also isn't different because it's all fundamentally the same shit. But if you're getting investor money and stuff, it adds more complexity at the beginning. Funny enough, it actually makes process far more important
Mm-hmm.
because now if things go bad, it's not your money that you're out on, it's other people's money. And if you're dealing with the kinds of people that can invest, they also probably can afford lawyers. And that'll be episode 32,
That's
how
why
to
we don't
avoid
go
getting
down this.
sued. Don't take on investors. Boom, 5-minute episode.
Well, awesome, man.
But
Good
yeah,
conversation.
and I'm excited to have hopefully everybody join us for episode 3, where we go into my world currently of how to be a real business with real employees and real structural problems. And suddenly it's not you doing everything, it's how do you stay on top of everything. So hopefully everyone tunes in for that.
We'll see you there.
See ya.